Hello, everybody. This is José Ignacio from the Uncomfortable Dialogues 2022. I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you Alberto Jiménez. Alberto is the founder of CertiPro and the current director of Miatomi. Alberto is an expert about risk management and IT capabilities. He's based in Chicago, Illinois. And without any further ado, welcome to our Uncomfortable Dialogue 2022, Alberto. How are you doing?
I am well, thank you. Good to see you.
Hey, Alberto, I know that you are an expert about risk management, and risk management and adversity seems to be they go hand in hand. So can you tell me what have you been seeing in terms of leaders facing risk management and the COVID adversity situation?
Sure. I mean, this is we're living interesting times, right? And locally, many organizations have survived the pandemic and survived the all the impacts that the pandemic created, right? The displacements and the supply chain problems and the personal health and then the organizational health issues, which is great. But there is a phrase that comes to mind. Stephen Covey used to say, "Nothing fails like success." And when I talk to business leaders about pandemic specifically, and that they talk very confidently about how they manage their pandemic response because they're still in business, right? They're still around, which is great. But when we dig a little deeper into what contributed to that success, so if I ask you about what plans did you implement or what capabilities work well in order for you to manage the response to the pandemic, some leaders really don't have a good response, which really leads me to believe that this is not a capability, right? That
Okay.
the successful management of this particular crisis was kind of best effort, people racing up to challenge and doing whatever it took to survive, rather than a plan or a repeatable capability. Um, and unfortunately, even after the pandemic, if you talk to many organizations, big and small, they don't have a pandemic response plan. We know the pandemic is not gone. We know there are going to be other waves. But even with that knowledge, very, very few organizations have a pandemic response, a formalized pandemic response. Now, this is
Okay.
important because the concept of risk, right? A risk only exists when there is a threat combined with a vulnerability, right? If we live in, I don't know, in Chicago, we don't have a risk of tsunamis in Chicago because there's no threat. We don't have an ocean close by. So when we talk about risk, it's important to consider both the threats that may become real and how vulnerable we are to them. Those are the risks that we need to manage. When you look at an organization, any organization has some basic requirements, basic resources to function, right? You need people, you need a place to work, you need some technology or tools, and there's a supply chain that you depend on. So those are the four things that any organization needs, and of course you need a market and customers and all that. But the focus of risk management, it's called an all threats or all risk approach, is really focusing on those resources. If there is a threat to your people or technology or supply chain or place to work, those are the risks that you need to manage. So it's really about protecting those resources. How do I protect my people? And a pandemic is a very specific animal because it attacks multiple things, right? It attacks your people. It can have an impact on your supply chain, as we saw. So that's a very complex undertaking. But we need to formalize those actions and How do you know the next wave? When do you send people to work from home? Or when do you bring them back to the office? What are the triggers to dictate the different responses? Those are the items that need to be formalized. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but we already learned from the past experience. So it's really formalizing, the actions we took. Did it work well? Can we do it better? Formalize and put them in a written document. And there are plenty of examples out in the internet, and definitely a lot of people who specialize in this, like myself, who can help with formalizing those plans.
Interesting. And from a business standpoint, if you look at the chain of command to make the risk management solution for the pandemic, as an example, or for the crisis in Europe, who should be the right person to really call to action? Should this be the CEO responsibility, or the IT person, or the human resources person? So where will the responsibility reside, in your opinion?
That's a great question. So the CEO is usually the right person to declare a state of emergency, but usually the CEO delegates that to someone else, right? To either a chief risk officer or a chief information officer or some other C-level executive. But the rules of engagement, the rules of the triggers that dictate what an emergency is, those are defined ahead of time, and those are agreed upon and signed off by all of the executives, right? So if you think of an emergency plan or emergency response plan as a big red button that says, if we have a crisis, we're going to press the button, right? You need to build that button first, right?
Exactly.
Right? So you need to define what does a crisis look like for us, and when you see a situation, it's like, oh, that checks all my items for a crisis, then you know how to press the button.
Okay. Point is, since crisis or risk will happen all across the years, from here on, even more crisis will happen, you have to have a plan. So you have to have this red button well defined before the crisis shows up. That's your point, right?
Correct. But the risk management is the practice of thinking about risk, what could go wrong, impacting my people, my technology, my supply chain, and how do I mitigate that, right?
Alberto, from your personal skill set or your toolbox, which are the 2 or 3 things that you are using the most in terms of facing adversity?
Well, I think most of the main one is mindset, right? Being aware that risks is something that we have to manage every day, just like quality, just like our brand, which is something top of mind. Risk is something that needs to be managed on a regular basis. So awareness, the mindset, having the right people, right? Because you need people with specialized skill set that have have a focus on managing, on analyzing risk, and developing the right solutions. So having the right mindset, having the right people, and then applying the right tools, whether they're technologies or processes to managing those risks. If you have the mindset, if you're aware that you need to actively manage risk, then get the right people, build that tool set, that red button, so that what does a crisis look like? How do we know we have a crisis? The pandemic was kind of escalating slowly, and it was obvious. Most crises don't happen like that. Most crises are the result of small things going wrong, and before you know it, now you have a crisis in your hand. If you didn't identify those triggers, you're going to be surprised, and you won't even have a red button, right? 'Cause you don't know what a crisis looks like.
Exactly. Good. Alberto, we have to land this plane. And the last question for you is more about your passion to enable business leaders with the proper skill sets. If I recall right, 10 years ago, you launched an initiative to certify professionals on certain fields, such as risk management and project management, and actually to any other skill set that you may deem appropriate, such as leadership facing adversity. So can you give us a quick glance at whatever you are doing about this great initiative?
Thanks for that question. Yes, that's very important to me. So we have a wave of innovation that is taking us, humanity, by a storm, right? Artificial intelligence, blockchain, robotics, they're changing. They have changed. They continue to change the way we live. What we are falling behind is how to upgrade ourselves, how to upgrade our own skill sets. So that's something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm working at it on different ways of facilitating how people upgrade their own skills. So far, we developed a mobile application. It's called Certi Pro, and that's intended to help people professionals develop, achieve, and maintain their professional certifications in project management. We are working on different iterations of this solution, as well as improving that solution, making it more holistic. But that's my legacy. I want to help other professionals. I want to help myself, but as well as other professionals, to upgrade our own skill set.
So thank you very much for the time, Alberto. And for everybody else, if you happen to have any question to Alberto or even to myself, or if you want to see Certi Pro app, just write down here a comment in LinkedIn and YouTube, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you.